I have to now talk about the character that we introduced into Robin of Sherwood and how it came about.
I was doing a show in the West End called Evita. I was playing Shay, and Ian one day was popping by Rannells and had this Robin of Sherwood script, which he was raving about. And we got chatting about Robin Hood and this show. And sometime after that, he asked me if I'd like to be involved to play a character called Edmund the Archer. And Edmund the Archer was the bad guy who was Belem's bodyguard, who has the big sword fight with Michael at the end of the first 2 episodes. And he called up and said, would I like to do this? And I said yes. It was Edmund the Archer up until the first day of shooting. And I arrived on the set and Ian said, OK, he's not Edmund the Archer anymore, he's Raziel the Saracen.
The Mark Ryan character, the Saracen, he was going to be killed in the very first episode. And I phoned Kip, having watched him when we were up in Alnwick shooting the first episode. I said, this boy is terrific. He looks wonderful. The girls love him. He looks wonderful in his leather outfit. We can't kill him.
Paul Knight is always in a sort of moment of throwaway bit of humour. Said, yeah, he's good in me. It's a shame we're losing him, isn't it, really? And I think Kip was there as well. And we said, well, shall we keep him? I mean, he's good, isn't he? Bloody powerful, you know. So we did.
So I jump in the car at the station and Paul says, do we have to kill Edmund? And I said, well, somebody's got to kill him. Of course, Robin's got to kill him. He's Baron de Belem's man, for heaven's sake. And he said, he's ever so good. And I said, what do you mean he's ever so good? He's practically a bloody walk-on. What are you talking about, he's ever so good? And he said, well, we think that he's good and he's worked with Ian Sharp before and he's a proper actor. And I said, who is this doyen, you know? And they said, well, his name's Mark Ryan.
We didn't want him to go. After 2 episodes, we realised that this was such a dramatic presence amongst the band. Didn't say anything, was just this, you know, a lot of kids' hero, really. The 2-sworded Saracen who never speaks but just is the total man of action, and of course with that marvellous face of his, and the real villain you love to love, actually.
Paul said, we want him to join the band. I said, Paul, you're out of your mind. What are you talking about? A Saracen in Sherwood Forest with Robin Hood? I said, he wouldn't last 5 minutes, they'd chop in the bit. And he said, no, but suppose there's a way that the fight develops, that they admire each other.
Tom! No! So, having not killed me, they then had to work out what they were going to do with the Saracen that they've turned loose in the forest for the next, 26 weeks, or whatever.
But of course, in later years, we now see Saracens in our later Robin Hood, the feature film. Where did they get that idea, I wonder?
He's very expressive, and he's expressive throughout his body. Which is a good actor. In other words, in medium and long shot, he was still telling you something, by the way he stood. I think, to a certain extent, they all had something of that.
Clive Mantle as Little John, well, for a start, just the perfect Little John. All the qualities of the gentle giant, and an extremely good actor. To me, he was just flawless.
I learnt an incredible amount from Ian Sharp, which is, you can have a laugh and work hard at the same time. You can have a laugh and do great work at the same time.
Few months and he's off again, isn't he? When he's drained the country of money.
You were stuff. He gave you your freedom.
Oh, yes, to die for him in Normandy.
Well, he could have died in Sherwood.
Then I'll choose Sherwood!
Perfect Friar Tuck. He couldn't really have played any other character, could Phil Rose. Good I mean, what everything Friar Tuck should be. I mean, apart from the obvious, you know, the roly-poly priest, but also, I mean, great facial expression.
Look after my bees.
I will, Lady Marion.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
At the beginning of the first season, of the first 6 episodes, they wanted to get the genial monk who listened and was very understanding. But then as the character progressed, you actually got a thinking Friar Tuck, because remember that apart from Maid Marian, Friar Tuck would have been the only one who could read French, Latin, Saxon, and could write it as well.
Hey, look at that. The Seal of Nottingham and the Abbey of St. Mary's.
You know, you needed that sort of, not the brains, but the old guy in the corner who knows a little bit about things and things.
Peter Llewellyn-Williams probably had the hardest part in the whole cast as the miller's son. It wasn't a terribly developed part, nor need it to have been. But he made something out of nothing.
Come on. Gizmo. Come on. Gizmo. It was your father too. It was your father too.
I think I was about 18 when I started, 18 or 19, and 21, 22 when we finished.
I found his performance extremely moving. There were times when he's crushed between horses, and you know, Robin was in danger, and he obviously hero worshipped the Robin Hood character, and would do anything for him.
As an actor, what I learnt was untold, really, because I never went to drama school, so in theory, Robin of Sherwood being my first sort of decent job was my drama school.
Robert Addy played the Guy of Gisborne and was a brilliant horseman.
I grew up in a stable yard, pretty much, so riding a horse was never a problem. But of course, Steve Dent, the horsemaster on Robin, didn't know me before the show, and assumed that I, like most actors, when asked if they can ride or asked if they can do anything, they say yes and then go away and try and learn before the shoot starts. So he came up with a dear old plug of a horse for the first double episode that frankly was so quiet, the thing was comatose most of the time and couldn't really get it to do anything. The moment Steve realised that I knew what I was doing, he came up with Fury, the black stallion that I rode for the rest of the series, who was a magnificent beastie and could be made to look very smart and do some exciting stuff. So.
Poor Robert always had to play the fall guy, but then that's Guy of Gisborne. He's the guy that really gets the cream puff in his face on every episode. But he took it with great spirit.
That's it. He finished the pig.
All right, finish him.
What do you say to that?
Animals!
What's wrong with animals?
Animals, are we? Who took away our rights as men?
Rights? You know rights, wolf's head.
That's it. Duck him, hang him, anything but kill him.
Aye. What's your life worth, Gisborne?
Nothing.
The trouble with the Sheriff of Nottingham, for instance, is that Robin always wins. So the Sheriff of Nottingham can't really end up as a big villain because he's always beaten, you know. So what we decided was to make him a bit like a sort of Tory minister, you know, a bit sort of stupid and reactionary, and so that's what we did, and brilliantly played by Nick Grace.
Nick played the sheriff, and Phil Jackson played the brother, and they were known on set as the Ugly Sisters.
The Lord High Sheriff of Nottingham, Robert de Reno. Lord Abbot Hugo de Reno. Sir Guy of Gisborne.
Sisters, sisters, there have never been such lovely sisters.
Somehow he was my little sort of sane corner. If anybody had a sane corner with Nick Grace, at least I could sort of sit down and be, I'd just have 5 minutes of sanity with somebody around about my own age.
Ian Sharp, the first director, was a terrific guide because I'd had this idea of making him very, very sophisticated, very urbane and ultra cool in my head. And Ian said, no, I don't want any of that, I just want you to be off the wall. You know, it's off the wall. So we went in that direction more of him being absolutely crazy. And, you know, when he lost his temper, he lost it to the 100th degree.
Those people are my property. The fields they work are my fields. And your masterly plan is to drive them into the forest to join up with that wolf's head.
There was absolutely nothing unique to my sheriff. I think, to be fair, and this is to Ian Sharp's credit, he made me go in a direction which I hadn't seen before in any other sheriffs of Nottingham, and that was being completely mad. And the slightest upset of any plan would make him climb up the wall and shout and scream and hit the nearest person.
An example of your ignorance! An example of your total inability to control the people of Sherwood and to destroy the power of Robin Hood! Leave it alone!
He was out of control a lot of the time, which, you know, we have seen in other sheriffs of Nottingham since then, but not before.
Ray Winstone, of course, I'd seen in Scum and various other, and wanted that tough, hard character.
I remember seeing Clive Mental. There was a place called, I can't remember the place, Notre Dame. It's like a club in the West End next to Leicester Square. And there was a party for some film or something was going on there. I think it was sort of a film called Party that he was in, Clive. And I knew all the boys in there, and I went along to the party with some mates. And he told me that they were casting for Robin of Sherwood. And I went, oh, fine. I mean, I couldn't imagine myself, you know, being in Robin of Sherwood. I didn't understand the concept of how they were going to do it. And it's been done a million times before. You know, Errol Flynn's done it, which was fantastic. And I got the call to go up and see him. And met Paul Knight, a little play, I think it was at the back of Pinewood somewhere. And explained what the format of it was going to be, that the Normans were going to actually be very, very sort of posh chappies. And the merry men as such, or the peasants, the Brits, were going to be from all over the country, you know, Scousers, from Birmingham, from London.
Ray has a power about him. He can, I've never known anybody who can express anger, and a physical anger and an inner anger that sort of bursts out better than Ray.
I think I was put at the end of a long list of people. I think I was one of the last ones they actually saw and cast. I think there was a lot of umming and ahhing about whether I was going to be in it or not, you know, whether they were actually going to go with me or go with someone else. But as luck would have it, I came through and got the part.
Ray sort of pretends a lot about acting. He's actually a very, very serious actor. He was the only one of the cast who came to me when I first met them all, who took me on one side and said, am I doing this right? You know, am I doing this right? Or what do you want from it, you know? And we actually had sort of serious discussion, and I thought, this guy's vulnerable as hell, and yet he's so strong, and yet he's so vulnerable. And I thought, wow, we're going to really see some sparks from this guy, and we did.
I'd die for each one of you. But there's no way I'm going to Nottingham.
Ray Winstone is really one of my favourites, I have to say. If I had a favourite amongst them all, they were great. I just found this guy, and now of course Ray has achieved the success he deserves. Enormously powerhouse, a tremendous on-screen presence.
My name was Will Skefflock. It's Scarlet now.
But I shall never forget his the scene in the dungeon when he did that monologue, the Will Scarlet monologue. Unforgettable. It's one of my favourite scenes in the whole 6 hours of Robin.
November night. Soldiers, drunk, mercenaries. They took her from me. When they'd finished with her, they trampled her to death with their horses. Then they laughed. Laughed.
Terry Walsh, brilliant fight arranger, he understood that a fight has to have a dramatic shape. There has to be a reason for it. It isn't just people hitting each other with swords. And he came up with some really original ideas. The cast loved him. He was quite good at making sure they were safe as well.
Terry Walsh, the stunt director on Robin Hood, very wisely set up, before we started shooting, a boot camp for all of us, so he could do a couple of things. First of which was to find out what we could and couldn't do. And then on the historical side, we wanted to make sure that we were actually pulling bows and arrows in the correct manner. One of the potential hiccups, actually, we were in pre-production at Pinewood Studios, and Paul said, and this is the point where you gallop down a ravine or something. And I said, gallop down a ravine, horse. Now we have a slight problem, because I didn't know one end of the beast for another. So there really wasn't any time to teach me, because we were busy doing other things as well. You don't really have to look very carefully, but I'm holding on for dear life most of the time. But then, you see, there is absolutely no historical precedent that Robin Hood was an expert horseman. I mean, he would have been, of course, but that was my artistic justification.
Terry Walsh for the training session, well, they were always good fun. That was number one. And I always looked at the sword, because they were great big swords, you know. And I remember speaking to Terry about it, you know. It wasn't so much the Errol Flynn sort of paddy cart, paddy cease. It was more like, I always looked at it as a club.
And I had thoroughly enjoyed those 2 weeks. I'd done archery at school competitively and so on, so that was just, it was like 2 weeks of fun. And then, of course, in 3 years of shooting the series, didn't shoot a bow once. Used crossbows all the time.
Terry was excellent. He basically watched us rehearsing, and he'd give us tasks to do, and he'd assess for himself what each individual person sort of was capable of. You know, like some people could climb trees, other people couldn't, and he got to learn this over well, a matter of weeks, I guess. And he was very good in that he'd let us do as much as we could ourselves before he called in the stuntmen to do it. Obviously, if something was too dangerous, we couldn't do it, but he did let us have a crack at it.
The staff fighting, actually, I'd done a lot in pantomime, because I used to play Friar Tuck in pantomime. I now play Dame. And that came in very handy, because there were certain... When Terry taught quarterstaffing, there was little moves that were very quick, that you got your fingers caught as the opponent if you didn't move fast enough. So that was something that you learned, and it actually stayed in the little grey cells, and you were grateful that it did. I've actually headbutted Terry Walsh in the very first episode. Judy Trott, playing Maid Marian, and I were going through the forest. The soldier appears. I bless the soldier's head goes down, taking the blessing, and I headbutted him. And he rolled away, and that was it. But my general size as well contributed to a lot of the fighting.
Before we actually went up to Bamber, there was a week of horse riding and archery and swords, all done at Pinewood. And I think that's probably where we all bonded during that week, because that's where we really got stuck into. And we went every day we worked. We did swords for most of the morning, then horses, and then archery. We had a wonderful archery instructor who's now a top stunt guy called Gabe Cronley. And we had the best people in the business.
We were training with the fighting, the horse riding, and the archery. And that was great fun. Great fun learning the new skills. I can't say that it all came very naturally to me, though. Horse riding was fun. I enjoyed that because I'd already been riding before.
Fine shot.
Thank you.
Well done, little flower.
The archery and the sword play It took a bit of getting used to.
I think Terry Walsh gave up on me quite early, really. I went for that fortnight's preparation, which I spent most of the time riding, because I love riding, although it always became a joke, because the first horse I was given, who I think was called Dolly, and I know Dolly is no longer with us, but she was a lovely white horse. Spent a lot of the time passing air, so the farting was the most exciting thing that I can remember about riding the horse, really.
The woman is a witch.
Yes, of course she is. And a very pretty witch, too.
I think I did one session on the fighting, and then it was just left. Terry said, right, well, we'll give up on that one, wait till the big fight comes up. And I like all the physical side, but I'm not a very good fencer. And so I think Michael and I just improvised that as much as possible, and I think there are lots of outtakes of that ending up, every time I mucked it up, we'd end up with a hug and a kiss and start all over again. Yeah.
Well, from time to time, equipment breaks, and the swords we used were actually dreadful. I mean, because they were just hunks of metal and completely unbalanced.
These swords, they're big, heavy pieces. And, to actually get a big swing into them, to actually stand there and fight maybe for 10 minutes.
And of course, if you're whacking the things against each other, they eventually break. And yeah, we were doing a sequence, and Mark Ryan's blade went whizzing through the air and landed not a million miles away from Judy Trott.
Gosh, I'd totally forgotten about that. Yes, it was so early on. It was in the first film. And I didn't know Mark very well. I didn't know Michael very well. I think it was Mark's sword. I'm not sure, but it did just... And it was a heavy sword. It was a heavy metal sword.
Really, it was on the first day of shooting where Terry and I kind of really hit it off, because he was having not trouble with the design department, but what happens is designers tend to run amok, with designs for swords and things. And they'd given me these great big hook swords that were very dangerous, very unbalanced and very heavy. And he took one look at me and he sort of gave me the choice of choosing which swords I wanted to use. And I went through them all and I felt them all and balanced them all. And the two I chose, although they were the purest, the nastiest quality, the worst, the poorest quality of the swords, were actually the safest, in the sense that they were the lightest, and I could control them easily. And the ones that the designers and the prop guys wanted me to have originally were the heaviest and the most dangerous. So we dumped those. And so he immediately realised, I think, oh, there's an ally here, because he's not insane. The actor is not going to want to do something that I don't want him to do. He let me assess it, and as soon as he realised that I could go, this is dangerous. I can't do the fight with these. He went, fine. So there was again. It grew out of it. It was organic.
We also had a tremendous amount of rain in that first series, and we were often standing under the trees in Bristol, in the heart of the woods, and the boys would just start singing.
We had terrible rain when it started. By May 20th, it was the wettest May on record. The entire crew were falling arse over tit. I mean, it was awful. And the poor camera operator, who was a brilliant camera operator, Roger Pierce, he had his first taste of Steadicam, and for 3 days he could hardly keep his feet to walk, let alone when we strapped the Steadicam on him. That was he just slid around like an ice ring. From about May 20th on, we had fantastic weather.
Yeah, I mean, as I remember, the weather in England is strange, and we always, because of production contingencies and financial, we always shot at the wrong season. We always started shooting far too early in the year, so we had to find bits of the woodland that had a bit of evergreen in them. But those problems are always in filmmaking, and you overcome them.
We started shooting on up in Northumberland on the 25th of April, as I recall. And April up there is pretty is a little bit later than the rest of the country. So if you notice carefully, there aren't an awful lot of leaves on the trees around there. But I'll tell you something quite funny. I'd done all the recce's in Bristol, in the forests and parks, actually, in the Bristol area. And I'd lined shots up and so on that I was going to do. By the time I got back to Bristol, of course I'd done the recce's when there were no leaves on the trees, or very few. By the time I got back to Bristol, I couldn't even see where the marks were, let alone where the shot was supposed to be, because it completely, the foliage had completely covered everywhere. So there's a lesson to be learned.
It was all a lovely, romantic, if you look back on it, it was a very romantic time of all our lives, because we were going to the most beautiful places. I adored going to these castles and being part of, and feeling the atmosphere of what it might have been like. Bamborough Castle and the beach is spectacular, and I've been back there, and I just remembered sort of riding on the sands through the dunes on a bareback horse with Michael in the very opening film, and I remember thinking, cool, this is the sort of thing I dreamt about as a child. It was so romantic.
There has never been as good, or will ever be as good a Maid Marian as Judy Trott. I kid you not.
I should have stayed in Sherwood.
With an outlaw?
With Robin Hood. And I'll be his bride. If he wants me.
Look at the quality that she brings, this quality of innocence, which is absolutely unique and wonderful. Wonderful. It is so romantic. Her first entrance is just magic.
I think it is one of the most exciting debuts I'd ever seen. I remember being at the British Academy when the first episode of Robin was shown to the BAFTA audience, and when Marion made her first appearance, if you remember, it was she's been working on the beehives, as they say, working at the beehives, and she pulled the bee veil off her face and revealed Judy Trott's wonderful beauty.
Well, he can wait.
And the whole audience gasped, and I thought, wow, what a wonderful debut in front of a film and TV audience.
We interviewed hundreds of girls, but she had a quality. She had a sort of Renaissance quality about her, Judy Trott, which was very different. She had a sort of period look. She was very beautiful. She was a smashing actress and fitted perfectly into the role.
I think I had to be seen about 3 times, had to read. I didn't have any idea how big the series was going to be, or that it was going to be 3 series. They said in the interview that they were going to go for a new approach, and that Maid Marian was going to be very much part of the gang, so to speak.
Marian.
I'm one of you. I have to be.
She was going to be very hands-on, physical, modern Maid Marian, and not the typical Maid Marian that we'd seen in the old films.
Judy Trott is probably the bravest woman in 1983 or whenever we shot this thing. There she was surrounded with some rather powerful male personalities and completely surrounded by male crew, strong male cast and so on, and just shone through it.
With any television drama that goes on for a while, the part evolves and opens up and becomes bigger. I mean, your personality, everything goes into it, and it develops naturally like that.
Kip used to have meetings with us probably about once every month, once every 6 weeks. We'd see him a lot more often than that, but we used to have a sort of a loose forum where we'd sit down over a beer and discuss how things were going, discuss what we liked, what we didn't like, or ideas we had. I don't think it's ever set in stone that Little John was that emotional a character, but he saw in one scene in the first series that I could get quite moved by things, and he actually loved that. He loved the fact that Little John could get completely maudlin, sentimental, self-obsessed, all those things, and he loved the fact that Little John could cry, So I mean, that was great to play. It's lovely to play a huge monster of a man who's got just a big heart and a very sentimental side to him.
I never liked working with fire and the arrows. I mean, with bows and firing the arrows. And that was at the end of the series when poor old Robin had got it. And we all had to fire an arrow with flames at the end of it. And we only were given 2 arrows. They only had a set. Can you believe this? 2 arrows for each of us. So we could only go twice because they were special arrows that were soaked in petroleum so that they catch light. And knowing that we could only do it twice, and everybody else had shot their arrow, and every time it came to me, my hand shook, and the arrow would just fall off, then it would just tip down lamely. I was getting so worried about firing these arrows. My hands were getting sweatier and shaking. That whole series I've been plagued, and I had to take some lessons, serious lessons afterwards.
They were shooting Marion going to the Abbey, because Abbot Hugh said, your lands come to the church and all that. And I walked to the gate, and it'd been raining and it was muddy, and I walked to the gate, and I've got the hat, the cassock on and everything, and you see me sort of wave, I get fight way through the horse and say goodbye to her. You see me looking a bit miserable in long shot and walking away, and they shout, cut, and I said to the director, you've not shot that scene, have you? He said, yes. They said, yes. I said, well, I've still got my green wellies on, right? And luckily, they hadn't caught me green wellies, because usually I had sandals, but it was a bit wet and muddy that day. So.
I'd been taught to a stage fight, which is a completely different technique than film fighting. And I'm not a natural boxer, unlike Ray Winstone, who is fantastic. Well, I mean, was a champion in his youth. And regrettably, the very first fight I ever had, I was terribly nervous and ended up decking a stuntman, and he broke a tooth, and it absolutely mortified me. And so I realised then that I hadn't really learnt as much as I should have. So I kind of went into training to make sure that never happened again. Dinny Powell, who when he was a younger man, he'd been I think ranked number 4 in England as a heavyweight, and we were doing a fight, and I had this idea. Dinny was supposed to pick me up and then hit me. I said, why don't you pick me up and throw me against this wall and then hit me? I said, yeah, I think it'll look great. Well, they turned over, action, I'm on the deck, and Dinny picked me up. My God, I've never realised one man could be so strong, because I was but a rag doll in his hands, and I literally took off, cracking the back of my head against the wall in the process, completely winded.
I think probably the only thing that I had to, that I was involved in having to reshoot in all 3 seasons was that ghastly fight in the mud with between Robin and Gisborne. Michael and I spent the day in the most, you couldn't stand up in this mud. It was so you had to crawl across it. It was really hideous. On the first day, I got a curious sensation after a short while of having been in there that my skin was tightening. And it turned out that what was happening is the chainmail that I was wearing, that was made out of knitted string, was shrinking in contact with the water, which was very hairy. Terry Walsh cut me out of that before I turned completely blue in the face. And thereafter, all the chainmail was made out of pre-shrunk string, just to be on the safe side. Anyway, got in, thought, well, thank goodness that's done, it's out of the way. Got into work the following morning, Ian Sharp sidled up to me and, guess what, we got to shoot the fight in the mud again.
As these things often happen, something went horribly wrong in the lab, and the film got all screwed up. So we had to reshoot it the next day. And then, which we did, and I was exhausted. And then at the end of the sequence, I had to swim out into a lake and kind of get away. And I was swimming out, and the camera was, if I recall, was about 50 feet away. It was a lovely shot. I shot it on a long lens. The water wasn't very deep, but it doesn't have to be very deep, you see. And of course, with the costume and the boots and me being physically exhausted, I suddenly realized I have no strength left. It's gone. I'm spent, and I'm in water, and help. And thank God for Terry Walsh. Because in the great scheme of things, this was a trivial little swimming exercise. I had to go maybe 10 feet. But he'd put Billy Bowes in the water just in case. And if he hadn't done that, I'm here to tell you, things might have gone slightly different.
The famous fight with Robin on the log next to a very beautiful waterfall in Bowood Gardens down in Wiltshire. And we'd been filming for all day and maybe gone into the second day. And it was a very, very narrow log. And they kept building bits on, you know, as the camera tightened so that we wouldn't lose our footing. But it just wasn't nearly wide enough. And Michael at one stage completely forgot his strokes, and I managed to hit him in a very, very tender place in the midriff, just below the midriff.
Right in that cock.
Which caused him immense amount of pain, and the film unit an immense amount of laughter and joy, and myself a certain amount of glee.
You see, a lot of the stuff that we did in Robin would not be allowed today. I say this in all seriousness. In other shows that I've been involved with since, we did 95% of our own stunts, of our own action stuff. I think in the entire show, I think I was doubled once and the shot was never used.
One of Terry Walsh's, the stunt director's, great skills, you know, he really taught us so many aspects of action. And that's something that sometimes doesn't happen too often. You know, you have a mentor who will teach you stuff in the same way that Ian Sharp took great pains to teach us all about cameras and lenses. He showed me 2 close-ups. And he said, right, look at that one. And I did. And he said, right, look at that one. And I did. And he said, now, which one is better, Michael? And I said, well, that one, clearly. And he said, yes, it is, but why? And I had no idea. I said, I don't know. And he said, well, now I'm going to tell you why. In this particular instance, stillness is the key.
You're Robin Hood. Ah, that he is, Robin Hood. You wouldn't rob me, would you? I've only a few sacks of grain, and they ain't mine.
Friend, we won't harm you. On your way.
Is it yours?
Hey?
The grain.
But he's very careful to reinforce this thing of there are no rules, actually. So break them if you want to.
When you're lucky enough to be in a major film series for 3 years, off and on for 3 years, you certainly learn a lot more about camera technique and about acting technique, in as much as that you really must hit the same emotion each time, and you might be doing... We were very lucky. There was a lot of money behind us, I assume, and therefore we did do quite a lot of takes. And so you had to make sure you could come up with the goods each take, and that was something I hadn't done before. I hadn't done as many takes on anything I'd done before in Brideshead or Heat and Dust as we'd done on Robin of Sherwood.
The whole setup of Robin was as close to perfection as you can get, and that the credit goes to Ian. The style, the look, the feel, the flavour, the camaraderie, the bond, all stem from a director.
I was originally asked to do the first 2 because that's all there were. There was just the first 2 hours. And then about 2 or 3 weeks into preparation, Paul Knight said, I'd like you to do more. And I said, well, I've got this picture coming up, you know, I'd really like to do. And he said, well, think about it. So I thought, no, I'll just do these first 2, they're great, you know, it's really good. Then the Rotten Things put episode 4 in front of me, which was 7 Nights from Acre, and I thought, I want to do this. So they made that episode 4, so I'd have to do episode 3 before it. And then they produced episode 6, which was a King Richard. I said, right, that's it, fair, I want to do the lot.
Because it was like making a film. But I suppose there was 7 of us all in the same sort of position, you know. And with Ian Sharp, I can't imagine anyone else doing the first 6 episodes other than Ian Sharp. I don't know what would have happened. He brought a style of probably film acting to it.
I certainly ran out of ideas as to how to shoot a Norman by the end of 6 episodes. When they said, would you like to do the next 6? I said, I can't think of any other way of killing a Norman, actually, so I think you better get somebody else in now.
I think at one time or another, you know, when you're kids, you dream about being a superhero, you know, or you play the game, you play that you're Superman or Robin Hood or whatever. I mean, Robin Hood was a medieval Superman, really, wasn't he? Medieval sort of superhero. And, you know, us guys, we got paid to to like live out our childhood sort of fantasies. It was brilliant, you know. We played out in the forest, we built camps, we climbed trees, we jumped in rivers, and we were paid to do it. And I think inside everyone there's that little bit of sort of childhood fantasy still there. And I reckon, you know, that might have something to do with why people are still interested in the story of Robin Hood.
I think the show's affected all of our lives in profound ways. I don't think there's anybody that you're going to interview is going to say, no, I just did it and it was a job and I walked away from it. I think everybody's been affected by it on some level in a profound way. And it's been a part of our lives that some people don't like that with their jobs and their roles. They do a show and they can't wait to get away from it, you know. And Robin is one of those jobs that I think we're all very proud of and has got a very warm spot in all of our hearts.
The most difficult aspect of producing Robin, I don't remember a particularly difficult aspect of producing. It was a very lucky production by and large. The people on it got on tremendously well. There was a great camaraderie. The crews at HTV, the technicians were extremely good and very keen because the series stretched them technically. We were asking questions of the technicians and they were doing things they hadn't done before. I mean, if there was any stress and strain, it was we were away from home for long periods of time, but that is what filmmaking's about. But it was a very happy period, I think, looking back on it all those years ago.